Hello, and welcome to our program, Where God Weeps, a program where we speak about the situation of the suffering church around the world. The Catechism of the Catholic Church teaches us that religious life signifies the very charity of God in the language of our time. To tell us more about the gift of religious life, it is my great privilege to welcome Sister Melba Lobaton, the formator of postulants in the Philippines for the St. Paul Sisters. Sister Melba, thank you for being with us here today in our program.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm glad for the invitation that you had in having me here.
Sister Melba, you have been a sister of St. Paul for 23 years.
Yes, that means to say in 2 years, I'll be celebrating my silver anniversary of profession.
Congratulations to you. Sister, when did you first come to know of God?
I should say that I'm quite lucky because ever since I was small, I have had my education with nuns, who have perhaps influenced also my own vocation. But I have been with nuns, and they have taught me all about God. Plus, there was a good catechism also in my family. I mean, my parents were very fervent Catholics, although they really would not claim that. They always would say, well, we're not really good Christians, we did not know how to educate you, but I got a lot from them, their values, the way that they always would bring me to Mass, regardless of the weather and etc. So I had good foundation.
So the example was very important.
Yes, yeah.
But was your, like St. Paul, were you struck by lightning? Was there one moment when you thought, this is when I'm going to become a sister? Or was it again a gradual understanding that this is perhaps where you wanted your life to go?
Well, it was a gradual understanding because as in all vocations, everything is a process. So, and even the understanding was gradual. Well, it started from, an initial attraction to the religious, not particularly the religious that I was with when I was in the elementary, for example, but, the life, and I was attracted by the way that they served others, the way that they had affection for us students and etc. So it was not a kind of, a lightning experience as St. Paul's was. It was something that was gradual, but it started actually when I was in high school, and from there it grew, until I was finally able to say that, well, really perhaps this is the way where the Lord wants me to go.
Was there an obstacle? Was there one challenge, a stumbling block on your way to the fulfillment of your vocation?
Well, I should say on the part of my family, there was none. My father was agreeable, although I could see it only from his face. He didn't say anything. I could just see it from his face. But with my mother, it was more difficult because she had given me a silent treatment for quite some time.
When she heard about your decision?
Yes, when she heard about my decision. And 2 months before I left, she was, giving me this silent treatment. But I guess it was after 2 weeks when I was already inside the convent that she wrote to me and said, I'm very sorry that I have been very, very selfish, but I respect your decision. And I guess I could say that I'm glad that you decided that this is what you wanted, what you want your life to be.
But why was she so hesitant at the beginning?
Well, because I'm the youngest. I'm the youngest, and I was very close to both my parents, and I guess that's what's painful for them. But speaking about obstacles, because as I said, discerning your vocation is a process, and when you're actually inside the convent, you still keep on discerning. So the obstacles actually came from myself. Okay,
how did they come?
like doubts, like, is the Lord really calling me? I have these defects inside of me. Should I go ahead, and etc. All these struggles within myself, those were the obstacles that were helped by formation, by people, mentors, and formators who were actually journeying with me as I went along. So they were kind of addressed. So there were no obstacles before that. It's kind of like I entered without knowing really
what it entailed.
Yeah, what it entailed, or what kind of life this is. I just had a vague idea of it, but the invitation was there, okay, and it was getting stronger more and more, and I needed to respond to that.
You are now the formator
Yes.
of the postulants. So your path in your own vocation is now an experience that you are called to give on to other young women seeking the same path as you chose. Would you say, with the doubts, everything that you have lived, was this God also preparing you or allowing these things to happen in you so that you could understand the next generation that you were going to be called to be responsible for?
I definitely would agree to that, because if not for the things that I went through, I would not be able to understand what they're going through. If not for the ups and downs of my life, especially the more difficult ones, I would not be able to know how I would be leading them or how I would co-discern with them, because my task as a formator is basically co-discerning with them, helping them make the decision, or giving evaluations and saying, perhaps this point of your life needs to be improved more maybe, or sometimes after some period of formation, you would say, you would co-discern with them and say, I think perhaps that you would be happier if you were not in the religious congregation itself, because you might have a lot of difficulties if you stay living the life of a religious. So it's not only co-discerning for them to go ahead, it's also co-discerning with them whether this kind of life is really for them or not for them.
It's like, if you will, the engagement period before you get married. As a married person, for example, the priest who was forming us at the time, he said the engagement period is as much, in fact, more to say no than it is to say yes. This is, however, a heavy responsibility, because somebody entrusts their life to you. And says, help me to discern the path of my life. How do you carry this responsibility?
With a lot of prayer. You get a lot more on your knees than on the knowledge that you have had. But of course, basically, you also need to have preparation as a formator. So there's a lot of discernment also going on inside of yourself, and not only with the person that you are journeying with. So that's how us formators, we carry sort of the burden that's on us. And also to be able to really give time to the foreman, to have a lot of patience, a lot of understanding, because you can see them that they're in one group, but you don't treat them as a group, because they're individuals, with their individual identity. And so therefore, there is what you call in information personal follow-up, where the person information goes to you once every 2 weeks for follow-up, and tells you, okay, I'm having this difficulty in my journey, or I'm glad that I realized this. All these realizations that somehow helps you to co-discern with them whether they really have a vocation to the religious life or not. And somehow they already get the idea as you journey with them, having these sessions with them, that yes, maybe I'm not called to this, or maybe I am called to this, and therefore, sister, help me. So it is a great responsibility, and you're not only thinking of the present moment, you're also thinking of the future, not only of the congregation, but also of the church, because the church needs these people, and you are forming them actually not only for the congregation, but for
for their future, for their future path with the church, in the church, however that might be.
Yes.
But as you say, that period is also a period of grace when that person is open to the will of God in their lives.
Actually, that's a very basic disposition for a person entering the religious life. She has to be very, very open to the Holy Spirit, to the formation process, to all the disciplinary norms that are there, and to all that is being given to her in formation.
The woman, I'd like to understand, what is it that the woman brings in her feminine genius, if you will, to the gift of religious life? What is it that she brings as a woman?
I can speak for myself as a daughter of St. Paul. We are 10 in the family, and we have the same job as the Society of St. Paul. No? The same, actually the same, but we are women and they're men. And what makes the difference is that we do the apostolate as women would do it, and they do the apostolate as men would do it. So it's the dispositions are not the same. The way that we do the apostolates is not the same. For example, just with the way of doing the apostolate, we do it as women and not as men. They have different ways of doing it, and we don't have to replicate them. No, we can put in our own genius as women into what we actually do for the church.
Is there a relationship between what we understand the church as bride, bridegroom, and religious, again, this question of the identity of woman in this relationship? I don't know if I'm making sense.
You do make sense. Actually, just very lately, a priest was telling us in class that we women have a lesser difficulty being identified with Jesus as the bride, no? But they have difficulty being identified. Religious men have difficulty being identified with being the bride of Christ because they're men, no? So it's a very strong image, no, of the church, the consecrated women religious. It's a very strong image of the relationship of Jesus with the bride.
Many understand religious life to be active, to be out. You yourself, you are in an active community with an apostolate outside the community walls. Perhaps less understood is the contemplative life, the life of being hidden, of staying inside the walls, a life of prayer. Can you give us a little bit of insight into what is contemplative life? What is it that contemplative life brings the church and brings the world?
Before I answer that, I just remember that as before, my work before was as vocation promoter. Okay, and I had difficulty convincing parents of women who wanted to enter our congregation. I had difficulty convincing them that they actually could see their children after some time, because they thought that, entering the religious life would be actually entering the cloistered, if contemplative is what you mean by that, the cloistered kind of life.
That's right.
It's a misunderstood kind of life because it's hidden. Nobody knows what's in there, and you just kind of like imagine what it's like there. See, you don't see your parents, for example, and you don't see anybody else, and you have no contact with the world, and your space is limited to just your convent. And in this way, it's a very radical answering to the call of Christ, where you dedicate your life mostly to prayer, and yes, to work, but with a lot of silence and with a lot of listening. So I understand what you mean when you say that it's kind of misunderstood, because the people actually would not understand why you would embrace this kind of life, this very radical following of Christ in silence and in just, a life of totally loving Him without other concerns. Very radical indeed. So it's not easy to understand that kind of life. So understand.
Why does the world need contemplative sisters?
Well, because they witness, to the other side of Christ, the side of Christ that always prays, that never ceases praying. Okay? The side of Christ that is always in contemplation with the Father. And also these nuns, these cloistered sisters, they do pray a lot for us. They intercede for the needs of the world. Sometimes we nuns, we can be guilty of praying a lot, staying a lot in front of the Blessed Sacrament. And, you know, when we actually get out of the chapel, we're different people. Our prayer life does not flow into our actions. But see, this is the witness of the contemplatives. No, we don't see them very well, but we can see the stance that they have, the prayerful stance that they have, their connection with the Lord. Most of the time reminds us of what we need to have in ourselves.
Sister, we hear today a lot about the so-called crisis of vocations. Do you see this crisis? Do you see that there are less and less women interested, young girls interested in religious life? How do you understand this?
I don't only see the crisis, I feel the crisis, and it's a real one for the church. But as one document of the church says, no, vita consecrata, we need to be serene, even in the face of difficulties, because the giver of the gift, the giver of vocations is God Himself. We cannot produce them, actually. It is God who gives them to us. And He has not failed us. All throughout history, He has provided for people who say yes to Him, who follow Him, who listen to the promptings of the Holy Spirit, and therefore who are able to answer to the needs of the times. So the failure, actually, of religious life is in lesser trust in God. It's not really the numbers. It's not really the numbers that is the indication of the effectivity and relevance of religious life, you know. But it's our life as religious. It's our persevering attitude despite the crisis that will help the young people and help everybody else out there who see us know that God exists.
I have this image in my mind of young people today, for example, walking around, and they've all the time got the plugs in the ears, you know, they've got the music and the plugs in the ears, and they're walking around with and you think to yourself, is the biggest challenge for God today one of distraction? That is, we have so much at our fingertips in terms of social media. I mean, the St. Paul sisters, you're involved in communications. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. But the fact of the matter is today that young people are overwhelmed with communications abilities and tools, but at the same time, perhaps the question is, does God need to shout louder in order to get through these earplugs which we've put in our ears, which don't allow us perhaps to hear silence?
Yes.
And in the silence, the Word of God.
I would agree with that. That it's one of the difficulties that young people have now. It's the difficulty of listening. There are no mentors to help them to listen. And for example, when you have discernment sessions, and you ask them to get rid for a while of their cell phones, for example, or their gadgets, they feel so uncomfortable. No? They feel that you're taking something very important away from them. But then, as the session goes on, the discernment session goes on, and there's a lot of silence and prayer there, they begin actually to appreciate. No? They learn that they have an option to keep silent, and that there's actually a lot that could go on in the silence, not only with the noise. No, the activity is not in the noise that they're hearing, but there's a lot that they're hearing in the silence. So I would agree with you that this is one of the difficulties right now. It's distraction. It's choosing from a lot of options. It's media that is shaping their values, and the values are no longer gospel values. They are a lot of worldly values, and that therefore it's difficult for them to choose, to even discern, is this correct, is this not correct, because my parents are telling me this, but media is telling me this. So even their values change, and they have difficulty trying to figure out what's good or what's not good.
I suppose perhaps if we were to look at it in a positive light, the other side of the coin is that because there's so much unrest, because there's so much distraction, at some point young people start to wonder what they're all about, who they are, where they. I mean, these are all life questions, but perhaps the distraction may be something where at some point the young person says, enough, I want to take these earplugs out, I want to find peace because I have no peace in my life.
Yeah, a lot of young people can come to that realization, but a lot more do not. From my experience, I interviewed two sisters from two contemplative congregations, and I asked, do you have many vocations to the contemplative life? And they say they have. They actually lack rooms to welcome them. And my own personal reflection was just this, no? Maybe it's the noise outside that's also inviting them in, because they would also want to embrace, that silence, and there's an option of being silent. It's not just, being in that matters, being in meaning to say you have a lot of gadgets, you should know a lot, you have to be updated. For example, your cell phone or your laptop has to keep on changing so that you can keep up with technology and etc. So up to a certain point, you get to reflect on that. So hopefully a lot of young people will get to this stage of boredom with what is usual.
I think also perhaps, I don't know whether you would confirm or not, but at some point, if a young person then does decide, the decision is a strong one because of everything that they are obliged to give up. I just give the example my father used to say. I asked my father, I remember saying, how is it when you grow up? And he said, well, it was gray. That meant that he could be a Catholic and go to church and so on, but not necessarily have to believe, because the culture was a Christian one.
Okay.
And so everything, you were expected, so you did the formalities without necessarily believing. Today, we can no longer say that we live in a Christian culture. We live in a post-Christian culture, which means if a decision comes, it is a radical decision. It is this decision that is strong and rooted. Would you say that you see the same in the vocations of the young women that are coming to you, that when they do come, there is a strength that perhaps might not have been there, for example, 50 years ago in the same way?
If you ask me personally, I haven't seen that yet. It's just, I feel that we're still in a period where those who are entering are still very much within a confused milieu. They're coming in with their confusions. They're not yet the generation that comes in already with because the modern technology is new. I mean, all these gadgets are they've just been there for a few years. And I still haven't seen, maybe that's just me, maybe that's just the context of Daughters of St. Paul in the Philippines, but I have yet to see women coming in who have a very strong decision of leaving everything behind. Because up to this point, what I've been seeing is that more and more people entering don't have a very a strong grasp even of basic catechesis. They don't have formation, no formation in their homes anymore. They've been educated, but education is not the same as formation. The ones that we get at home, the ones that our parents tell us. So they don't actually have mentors anymore. So they come in confused. They come in with values that are confused, and they don't know who to listen to. So I have yet to see that point where those who are entering are really entering with very strong decision to give up everything because they're saturated with what
the
they're
world.
hearing with the world and all that the media is offering them.
Sister, if we were to recap, what would you say is necessary today? For example, in your description of the young women that are coming to you, what is it that we need to do as families? What is it that we need to do as a society to continue to help support religious vocations?
Well, first and foremost, because as I already said, that the gift of vocations is coming from God and from the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, and that therefore, first and foremost, I would like to say that we really need to pray for vocations. And secondly, to encourage them when we see them in our communities, for example, in our parishes, in our families. Because right now I can see that parents, they could not imagine their children ever thinking or even, thinking of this possibility of entering the religious life. It's something that they go against immediately. So that's one thing. I mean, if we're able to encourage vocations in our communities, we can also encourage them in our own families and pray for vocations in our own families. But also to be able to reach out to the formation process. For example, the needs of foremans in poorer countries, where they need a lot more of education so that they get formed better for the church.
Sister Melba, thank you very much for having been with us today on our program.
Welcome. I'm glad to be here.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for having been with us today in our program, Where God Weeps. And as Sister Melba has called, please pray and look to supporting religious communities, for example, that of St. Paul Sisters, who are doing so much in the area of religious formation. Thank you for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.